one thing to note is this case is not your typical UFO case. The part of it that is so important is the amount of data that we have in the video. And the second part is that splitting in half.
Hello and welcome to Enigma Sightings. At Enigma, we're creating an app to collect UAP sighting reports and share them with the public, as well as help compile the data for scientific investigation. We created this show to interview some of the witnesses, researchers, and other experts that discuss some of the most compelling UAP sightings and investigations. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas. I'm the Director of Content and Research for Enigma. I've been writing about and researching this topic for many years, as has my guest. Today's guest is a fellow member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, Robert Powell. He has a BS in chemistry. He's a former collegiate debater. He also has over 28 years of experience in engineering and management in the semiconductor industry and has managed a state-of-the-art chemistry laboratory and an R&D group that worked on nanotechnology using atomic force microscopes and near-field optical microscopy. I'll have him correct me on that term. Robert also co-authored the reports on the Stephenville Lights sighting, which you can read in our library, and we'll have him back at some other point to talk about. And also, of course, the event that we're going to talk about today, which is a UAP event that occurred in 2013 in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. Welcome, Robert.
Nice to see you again, Alejandro.
Yeah, nice to see you again. Yeah, for full disclosure, both Robert and I are board members of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, and so much has changed. I want to start off with this real quick. Since we started doing this, I mean, it's exciting that the scientific community interested in this topic is really burgeoning.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. I mean, SCU has over 240 members now, over 30% are PhDs. And then you have the Galileo Project, which I think they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 members. And a good percentage of those are also PhD scientists. So, yeah, it's not like the old days of Hynek, where they had to have the invisible college. It's becoming more of an acceptable subject to discuss.
Mm-hmm. And then when you and I started interacting, I guess probably in the early 2000s, this was a topic that was still perhaps most heavily kind of, suppressed by the taboo. It was really, back then, not a popular topic among kind of credible researchers or the mainstream or science. It was more popular among the kind of the conspiracy crowd.
Right. A lot of stigma back then. I think you probably remember there was, I believe, a representative or senator out of New Mexico that was running against Hillary Clinton. And all he said was he had seen a UFO, and that was all it took to derail his campaign.
Yeah, I think it was Kucinich, and it was during the debate, it was Obama who was not that well known. And it was another one of the times where he kind of took the spotlight and said, well, I don't know about what's going on up there. I'm more concerned about issues going around right here. And that got lots of laughs, and kind of, unfortunately, Kucinich's campaign ended soon after.
Yep.
And then, funny enough, Hillary's campaign more recently, UFOs or UAP were a big topic with that, just showing how far it went.
Yeah, things have changed.
Yeah, we've come a long way. And one of the reasons is because of some of these great cases, many of which, you've looked at and researched and written papers on. One of those being the 2013 event in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. So let's get into this one. Let's start off with, how did you come across this case?
Okay, yeah. A good case like this comes along every few years, one pops up. And so this one, we were notified about the case by someone out of Homeland Security. And apparently what had happened was this Homeland Security had videoed this object during one of their typical, routine drug and reviews as they fly around the island. So apparently this video was shared in the Homeland Security offices. Everyone had seen it. It was going around. And then they sent it to the Air Force, I believe up in Quantico, Virginia. And the Air Force replied back after about 2 weeks and told them, well, we don't know what it is. Why don't you go send it to a UFO group? And so that's what they proceeded to do. So they contacted one of the individuals that's in the SCU organization. And he and myself, we put together a team of about 5 to 6 people. And we began to investigate it. And when I first saw the video, when you first start looking at it, it's like, well, okay. But then when you see this object split in half into 2 pieces, that's when it was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And that's what got us to, gave us the interest to really spend, I would say we spent probably 1,000 man hours at least on analyzing this video.
Right. And I mean, putting together that paper, because you guys had brought me in pretty early, at least made me aware. But what that took about a couple of years maybe to complete that research.
The event started in April. I mean, the event happened in April. And then we started working on this paper, I believe, in July of 2013. And we did not release it until 2015. So it was almost 2 years before we finished the paper.
Wow. And the witnesses are still anonymous, correct? They were back then, but you all were able to vet them.
Right. Yeah. We vetted the witnesses, met with the witnesses, and they're still anonymous.
Mm-hmm. So I guess let's go through what happened. I believe, like you said, these guys are on patrol, leaving the Aguadilla base, flying, and maybe you could talk about the aircraft and then how they first spotted it.
Yeah, this is a typical Homeland Security mission. It's a 2-propeller aircraft, and Aguadilla is in kind of north of Puerto Rico. Is about, say, 50, 70 miles across, and 40 or 50 miles north and south. And this is on the northwest coast. And so this Homeland Security aircraft had taken off, and they're going to do their usual run around the island to make sure there's no one smuggling drugs in or anything nefarious going on. So they've taken off, and right about the time they've taken off, the control tower notices this pinkish colored light moving towards the island, coming out of the northwest.
So it was nighttime?
It was nighttime, right. I think it was about 9 o'clock local time. And so they radio the Homeland Security plane, and they say, hey, could you come back around the airport and, check, see if you see anything. So the Homeland Security plane turns back around, comes back around the airport, and they see this pinkish light coming towards the island. So they turn on their camera system, which happens to have an infrared camera system. And at about that time, the light turns off of the object. So the light goes out, and they're just viewing it using their camera system only. And they track this object for almost 3 minutes as they're going around the island. So they don't deter from their mission. They stay on their mission, but they keep tracking the object as they're flying. And you see the object move over the island, and then you see it go back towards the ocean, and then it goes into the water and comes out several times, 2 to 3 times. It goes into the water, comes out of the water, and then it splits into 2 equal parts. And when we first saw it, we thought, did that split, or did another one come out of the water? So we broke that video in frame by frame into over 8,000 frames. And so we looked at it frame by frame, and it was like, no, it did not come out of the water. The object itself basically got larger and then split in half into 2 equal sized pieces. And then one of those goes back into the water, comes out, goes back in the water and stays. And then the last one finally goes into the water, disappears. And that's, the end of the video. You see the camera crew panning, trying to find it again, but that's the last they see of it.
Hmm. When you watch the video, what you describe is what it apparently does. I mean, when you watch the video, that's what it looks like, the whole sequence that you
Right.
went through. We'll go through some of the skeptics and some who think that it kind of could have been something more mundane in just a moment. But the witnesses themselves, is that what they described as well? That they were under the impression it came from the ocean, went over the island, and then went back out to the ocean?
Right. The witnesses themselves say that, they see a light and that the light goes out. And then as they continue to track the object, they say it goes into the water and then, disappears. So that's what they saw also.
Gotcha. So, and I guess let's describe, what have you been able to determine about the shape of the object?
So, yeah, part of the paper actually looks at the object's shape. And bear in mind, we're looking at it in the infrared. So one of the guys on our team, who happened to be a physicist that worked on some of the fusion reactors, uh, he looked and did analysis of the shape, and his best determination, right, was an acorn type shape. Now, he couldn't say that absolutely because, but that was his best guess based on the work he did. And he spent quite a bit of work looking at and trying to understand the shape of the object, because part of the problem is the object is rotating and moving around. It's almost like it's tumbling through the sky as it moves. So you're seeing different angles to it, and that makes it hard to discern the exact shape. But his best guess was an acorn shape.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the other difficulty is that what we're seeing in the flare is that as a heat signature. So there could be portions of the object that are more closely, the temperatures more like the background temperature, so it wouldn't really register on the camera. Whereas the hotter areas are what we're seeing more of, correct?
Well, actually, you do see the entire object in the camera.
Okay.
Because amazingly, the type of camera that's used is basically a military type camera. It is super cooled. They cool the camera, and that camera is capable of measuring as small as 1/10 of a degree centigrade, which is about 2/10 of a degree Fahrenheit. So you can. That's why when you see the video, you see the waves, because it's actually looking at the temperature difference between a wave, which has come up from the ocean, and the ocean surface itself. It's a very amazing piece of equipment. So yeah, but it can see the entire object.
Gotcha. Yeah, really interesting. And then when it gets to speeds, what were the velocity characteristics?
Okay, so in order to determine speed, we had to know exactly where the object was located, right? And so we found 3 places in the video where we knew where it was located. One, it goes behind the telephone pole. The second time, it goes behind a tree and disappears and reappears. And then the third and strongest time is when it impacts the water. So in all 3 of those instances, it's actual, what we call XYZ location, right? And from that, if I know where it's at, then I can calculate its speed. And the speed of the object varied from as slow as about 35 miles an hour to as high as 110 miles an hour. So nothing super, fast or anything. The size of the object was a little more difficult to discern because of all this rotation and distance. But we know the object was somewhere between 3 and 5 feet in size.
Mm-hmm. So fairly small. And then propulsion. The IR, one of the great things about IR is that it can tell, at least where there's extreme heat, which is typically what's necessary for propulsion, except for maybe in a balloon. But it didn't seem like there was an indication of what the propulsion may be, correct?
Right. There was no indication of a propulsion mechanism that we could see. Like, for example, when you look at the video, you'll see a jet sitting on the tarmac, and you can see the white hot of the engine of the jet. But the object itself we were not able to measure its exact temperature, but it was nowhere near like the temperature of a jet. The best we could determine was the temperature of the object was somewhere above 105 degrees. There's a part in the video where you see cows, and we know the temperature of the cows. In the asphalt road, we know the temperature of the asphalt road. And so we just use those as ways to try to correlate to the temperature of the object.
Mm-hmm. And the temperature seemed consistent, correct?
Yes, temperature stays fairly consistent throughout the video.
And that's what's interesting is that it seems like temperature and the speed were pretty consistent, even when it apparently seemed to go in and out of the water.
Yeah, actually, when it impacts the water, we could measure a slight drop in speed. It's very slight. And we could also measure a very slight indication of a splash, but it impacts at over 100 miles an hour. And you would expect a pretty good splash. But the splash was minimal, and the speed drop, it drops down to about 80 miles per hour once it enters the water. And the speed continues to drop until the point in time when it comes back out of the water, and it's moving at around 40 to 45 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So it did get that slowed down. And temperature, did it say about the same, or did it drop a bit?
Well, while the object is in the water, you can't see the temperature because the water blocks the infrared signal. So you can't see the object physically in the water. You just know that it's gone into the water. Now, if someone looks at that video, looks very carefully, you can see kind of a ghost image of the object as it's moving through the water, in and out. You'll see this. And what we believe that is, it's an effect which is similar to what happens when a submarine moves through the water. You get a wake, and that wake causes a temperature change in the water. And since this equipment can measure down to 1/10 of a degree, it's able to see the temperature change in the water as the object is moving through the water.
Really interesting. So, yeah, I mean, a head scratcher when you put all that together. I mean, what can cruise that quickly with no apparent propulsion and then go in and out of water? There are newer drones that can launch from submarines. I think there's a new one in, I can't remember what country, that can dive into the water and come back out. But the propulsion's apparent on those, but the speeds are nowhere as fast that I'm aware of. And, the characteristics are much different than what was observed in this object.
Yeah, we actually went and looked at all the drone systems that we could find to see if there's anything that could duplicate that. And there wasn't anything that could purely duplicate what we saw, but it wasn't so much that someone might not have developed that technology, right? So we didn't think that the ability, the speed, and the ability to move in and out of the water was something that indicates, okay, this can't be manufactured by a person, right? That we felt was still possible, right? Because, for example, there is a drone that Boeing makes that it has wings initially, and it impacts the water at high speed, and the wings blow off of it. Now, we didn't see, that wasn't seen in the video. So this is not the drone, but I'm just saying we do have some technologies. And then the drone moves into the water at fairly high speed, but that drone can't come back out. It would get recovered by a submarine. There aren't drones that can come out, but what they do is they kind of float to the top, and then a rotor blade kicks in and pulls it out of the water. It's very difficult to break the water surface unless you have like a jet or rocket engine that kicks you through the water's plane. But there was no indication of a heat source like that to have helped it break through the water. So that was really, it's still hard to explain. We could not explain that, but we can't rule it out as something that's just too far beyond what we can do today.
Mm-hmm.
What was unique that was something we just absolutely could not explain was the object splitting in half at the end of the video. That we just don't have an explanation for.
Mm-hmm. And then, as far as the veracity of the case, the one last, I think, important point was that the author, Billy Cox, who's written for, I think, the Sarasota Herald Tribune, he's blogged on his own. He writes about this topic, and he was able to kind of engage Homeland Security and got kind of a sort of confirmation of the videos that it's real.
Right. I think basically their answer, which is we can't comment on it because it's official business, basically, right? So indicated that yes, it was real, but they would not comment or verify that it was their video. But we know that it was, and the reason we know is because we got radar data. So we could follow on radar the Homeland Security aircraft as it moved. And we could match up the radar's data with the radar that's on, not the radar, but the information on the video, right? That tells you the plane's latitude, longitude coordinates. So we know that video came from that plane. So there's no doubt that that's where the video came from.
Mm-hmm. And then was there a flight delayed due to the proximity of the object near the airport?
Yeah, because when that light's approaching this airport and they've got aircraft that come and go, in this case, it was a FedEx airplane that was ready to leave. They postpone the departure of that plane because you have an unknown target that's coming over the airport. So that's an air safety hazard.
Mm-hmm.
So it delayed that flight for some time until the object had left.
Mm-hmm. Now, some of the detractors who don't think this is so unusual, some of their theories, let's go through maybe some of those, and you could speak to that. One being that perhaps it was a balloon, and that what we're seeing is parallax. So in other words, the plane did fly in kind of a circular pattern. So what they're saying is, if you have something that's sitting still, like if you take your little Superman doll and you hold him in your hand and then you move around Superman, but Superman's right where he is, it'll look like he's flying because the background's moving. So what they're arguing is that this was a balloon maybe moving very slowly, and that the background is moving because of the plane. I mean, I think for one, it would be strange that these pilots would think it was unusual if that's what they were seeing. But what are some of the other aspects which you feel discount that theory?
Well, the key aspect is this. That theory is valid if you do not know where the object is, right? Because all you see is you're looking through this line of sight, and the only thing you truly know is somewhere along this line of sight, the object is there. And so they're arguing, oh, no, it's a lot closer to you, and it's smaller, and it's a balloon. But the problem with their argument is we know where the object was, right? Because we know when it went behind a telephone pole, a tree, but most importantly, we know where it impacted the ocean. So their argument completely falls apart once, if you believe it impacted the ocean. So what they argue then, right, because they have to maintain their argument, it's like, oh, well, it didn't impact the ocean. First thing they said was, it didn't impact the ocean, disappeared behind a cloud. Well, the problem with that is you can see the waves, right?
Right.
So it didn't disappear behind the cloud, we couldn't see the waves. So then once you explain that to them, they go, oh, well, maybe the camera just lost its ability to visualize it, and that's what happened. Or maybe the temperature got closer to the temperature of the ocean, and then it just kind of disappeared. But the problem with that is, number one, not only do you visually see it, right? The guys on the plane that visually saw it, but if you look at the video right before they zoom in on it, you'll see it touch the water, and you see the water actually change temperature as the object touches the water. Then the third thing is we actually detected a splash with the work we did, and that's in the report. And then fourth, we detect the speed drop as it impacts the water, right? So if they're true and it's just a camera malfunction, right? And it's like waving a wand. It's a camera malfunction. Well, then you wouldn't have the speed drop either. So there's like 4 reasons why that object did impact the water, besides just that you see it impact the water.
Yeah, and when you said it moved behind objects, I know their argument is that, well, it looks like it's moving behind the objects, but it's not because of the nature of the camera. You can't tell if it's in front or behind. But I mean, when you watch the video, it looks pretty obvious it's behind the object.
What they do is sometimes the strength of the IR signature from the object weakens, so it dims a little bit, right? But that's not unusual. That's what you expect to see, just even in the optics, right? In the optical videos, if you're looking at something can dim and brighten. But when it goes behind an object, it doesn't just dim. I mean, it's gone. And that's what you see in the IR. We looked at the actual pixel values, and you go from this nice distribution of pixels to 0 when it goes behind that tree. But like I said, the most important is it impacts the water. There's no doubt that this object went into the water.
So with the object on the water and breaking up with the otter, another one of the debunking ideas is that there were birds there, and that there was just birds taking off from the water, and 1 bird flew in and then 2 flew out kind of idea. What do you think of that? And let alone that doesn't explain the rest of the video.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't explain any of the rest of the video either. Plus, the speed of the object, right, when it impacts the water, is at over 100 miles an hour. So there's no bird, that's going to impact the water at 100 miles an hour, come back out of the water, go back in, come out, and then all of a sudden now there's 2 birds. So the bird argument's even weaker. We felt the best argument was the drone. That it's some advanced drone, except for the problem of the splitting in half. And it's important that your audience realize when I say split in half, I'm not saying it breaks into 2 pieces. I'm saying the object doubles in size, and then when it splits in half, you have 2 objects now of the exact same size as what you had when you had the first object. So it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I have no explanation for that.
And I would say, that you're open to alternative perspectives. You're just asking that they make a scientific argument like you all have as to, or at least a research and to put their argument into, detailed what their argument may be to prove their side.
Right.
But I think that you're definitely seem to be in the past, you all have definitely invited people to take a look and figure out, what they think it might be. Right.
But the problem is most of the debunkers want to look at one little piece. They don't look at the entire video, and because they've got a prejudice outcome that they're looking for. They want to debunk it, and so they're not interested in the overall video. They're just, can I find a piece that I can debunk some way?
Yeah, and the other issue is most of those theories don't account for the light, how this object was seen in the first place, how it was, a light off of the ocean.
Right, and so that's again how the debunkers, they just add to their theory to try to make it fit right. So it's like, oh, we need a light. Okay, well, so they say, how about a party balloon that's got a candlelight in it? Well, of course, the first problem is the light went out. It's seen both by the tower and by the guys in the airplane. So that light did not maintain itself. But furthermore, with the problem is that the winds that day were 13 miles an hour. And those party balloons are basically a very light plastic sheath with either a candle in it or some hot object that's causing the warm air. Well, as soon as you get any significant wind, it collapses the side of your very light plastic balloon and then it falls. So I think 8 miles an hour is the maximum that you could launch a any type of party balloon or Chinese lantern and not have it come down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just another one of these that come up with an idea to try to explain the facts, but they don't really look at, does this really fit what's seen from beginning to end of the video?
Mm-hmm. Right. And I mean, if I guess asking your opinion, do you know what it is? I mean, it seems to me it's an unidentified. We just it's still outstanding what this might be.
Yeah. We don't have any explanation for it. We cannot come up with a reasonable explanation.
Mm.
And, sometimes you just have to say, we don't have an explanation. And
Right.
for whatever reason, debunkers are incapable of saying, I don't have an explanation. They're going to they're wanting to create one no matter what.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to come across, that where, debunkers are all bad or something, but there is this, there's this side, there's the other side as well. There's the side, obviously, that, this has to be aliens. And, they're not providing evidence to support that idea other than that it's unidentified. But on the other hand, you have the people that, it has to be something mundane. And again, they're not providing the evidence to support their idea. And you do have those two sides. Even Dr. Alan Hynek used to talk about how his attitude was when he started this, that there's no way that these things can be unexplained. They're just misidentified. I'm going to come in and explain that. And that was the mindset, that there's no consideration that there can be something mysterious. So we're going to figure out what it is, and whatever closely fits, that's got to be what it is. And he, kind of later in life talked at length about how he had to break that attitude and have more of an open mind, and how all scientists should have more of an open mind until we can prove what it is. And we've got to admit that we just don't know.
Yeah.
So, and there have been colleagues that you all have sent the paper to, right? And so far, a lot of the scientific community, or at least colleagues that you've sent it off to, support the paper.
Yeah. 3AF Sigma 2 is an example of a French organization made of aeronautical engineers, and they're tied in with France's UAP program called GPON. And they've looked at our papers. They actually had a good input because we had radar data where we detect an object coming out of the northwest towards the island before it was seen at the tower. But the problem is, it's almost like the object is just like zipping back and forth short distances at extreme speed as it moves towards the island. And it was like, that doesn't make sense. But the French actually had a good explanation, which is when you're jamming with, when you're using techniques to trick radar, or if you have a plasma, then you will get that, because what's happening is the radar beam hits the plasma and it's bouncing around before it gets kicked back. So it's coming back at a different angle and at a different time than it should. And that's causing these crazy readings that you pick up. But the radar shows the object moving towards the island. It's just that you've got all these crazy movements as it's going in that direction. So that was a good input from the French on what could cause that.
And I mean, is it possible it was some sort of plasma? Do we understand? Do we have enough information to really make any conclusions about the materials of the object?
Yeah, we don't have any information on what the object could have been made out of. We don't know how it propelled itself. The plasma argument has some wings, because just from the historical study of the UAP subject, we know that there's a lot of indications that these objects often have a plasma that can accompany them. And so that's a reasonable hypothesis that there may have been a plasma around the objects, so that it was not purposely jamming the radar. It was just the plasma was interfering with the radar signals.
And I don't know if I asked this specifically, but while it was caught on video, was it also caught on radar?
It was caught on radar prior to being caught on video, and then it disappears from radar. So there's one of two things that happen. Either it, became transparent to the radar, kind of like stealth aircraft, or the more likely, which is what we think happened, is once the altitude dropped below a certain altitude, and we calculated once it dropped below 500 feet, then it would disappear off radar, because the radar, the horizon, right, it drops. So you can only see so far as you drop to lower altitude. Same reason why, if you ever watch Dr. Strangelove, the B-52 is hugging the hilltops, because he doesn't want to show up on radar. So that's why we think it disappeared off radar. And towards the end of the video, it impacts water. So at that point, its altitude is 0. Then we think by the time it came over the island, it was below 500 feet.
And then I guess, the altitude question, I don't think I asked that. How high were you able to determine it was during that path?
Well, the altitude we know at certain points, because like when it goes behind the tree and behind the telephone pole, it's below 30 feet in altitude. And of course, once it impacts the water, it's at 0. It's harder to say what was its altitude when it first came over the island, right? But our best guess is probably a couple of 100 feet in altitude.
Now, I know some of the papers that you have worked on have gotten quite a bit of attention and have been referenced by, former or even at times current people in the government working on this topic. What about this Aguadilla case? Have you heard a lot from, let's say, NASA or the DOD or from anyone else kind of having an interest?
I know I've had people who were on the UAP and the ATIP programs that were aware of the Aguadilla case. So I know the ATIP guys had seen it. I'm pretty sure that Jay Stratton's UAP task force group had seen the Aguadilla paper. So I know it's made its rounds there. How much Congress has seen it, I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of these exciting cases, I think, that it's still a little bit under the radar, no pun intended, that I think will kind of garner more attention over time. But that's why I'm really excited to highlight this case, early on in our sequence of videos here. And was really happy to get this article in our knowledge library, because I think it's a very significant case. And I guess maybe you could speak to that, the significance of this case.
Yeah, the one thing to note is this case is not your typical UFO case, right? We don't have a flying disc or a triangle or one of those. It's a very unique. There have been others that have been similar, but it's it's not your typical UFO case. I think the part of it that it is so important is the amount of data that we have in the video, and the second part is that splitting in half is, to me, is just very amazing.
And, I think it's important to note this is an example of a transmedium object. So some people might not be aware of this, but there's kind of been 2 acronyms out there that the government has used for UAP: unidentified aerial phenomenon and unidentified anomalous phenomena. The latter is what Congress has kind of picked up. And in that definition have been cleared to explain this includes transmedium objects, meaning an object that goes from, let's say, space to the atmosphere, or like in this case, the atmosphere to the water and back, those sort of objects. So that it fits in the realm of UAP. And even in the recent report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, it clarifies in there, even though they're using the aerial term, that they do include transmedium objects in their definition of UAP. So this is one of those kind of rare examples of a transmedium event.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to catch a transmedium event. And this, off the top of my head, this is the only one that I can think of that's on video.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other exciting thing about this case is that it kind of brought together the SCU. in that really it was kind of just a group you all had brought together to research this case, and that ended up by the end, this same group created the SCU.
Yeah, it's a good point, Alejandro. I don't always think of it that way, but this case really was the birth of the SCU.
Mm-hmm. Which is pretty exciting, especially right now when science is burgeoning. And, it used to be kind of a lonely endeavor where there's kind of a smaller group of us that, kind of fighting for credibility. But now, that it's seen as a credible topic, now it's such an exciting time with more scientists being open to this sort of research.
Yeah, the SCU will be 6 years old later this year.
Wow.
Time flies.
It does fly. Although, to be honest, it almost seems like it's been longer.
Yeah, I guess in ways, in certain ways.
But I guess a lot of us in the SCU have been working together for a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
Well, great. So thank you so much for sharing this. Is there anything else you wanted to share? Maybe more about the SCU?
Just to let everyone know, the SCU has various projects, that they're working on, from underwater objects to, concepts on propulsion for UAP, as well as characterizing UAP. So we have a lot of different projects that, we're constantly working on.
Mm-hmm. What the website's explorescu.org. We'll put it in the show notes. And I think one of the most exciting things recently is a paper that came out where they analyzed sighting reports, which is great because that's exactly what Enigma is all about, is collecting sighting data. So to do this sort of research where they look back historically to see if UAP really are historically seen more around nuclear facilities. And they did find some interesting nuances there.
Yeah, it's a very good paper, and it's on the website, and it basically compares UAP sightings over nuclear facilities and compares those over regular military facilities that are nearby. So that way you have a control. You have a similar type facility, but just without the nuclear part to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they statistically looked at that, and it's really interesting. So I would urge everyone to go to the website, take a look at that, as well as some of the other papers that we have on the website.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much for joining me. And I know this won't be the last time because you've got a few other cases that you've worked on that are equally as incredible and mysterious. And who knows, between these next few months, there'll probably be even more papers and more cases that'll come up. So this will probably be the first of a few interviews with you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Good to talk to you again. Take care, Alejandro.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Enigma Sightings. If you've had a UAP sightings, go to enigmalabs.io and click on the submit button in the upper right-hand corner. You can also find the link in the show notes below. This helps us in our efforts to better understand what UAP are, and so that researchers can write papers like that nuclear study we just talked about that SCU has done recently. You can also go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel and or our audio podcast to make sure that you don't miss a show. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and we'll see you next time.